Israeli armored vehicles, which until recently were considered among the most protected in the world, are now facing an entirely new type of challenge in southern Lebanon. A situation that would have seemed almost impossible just a few years ago has, by mid-2026, begun to significantly alter the overall configuration of activity along the line of contact. Expensive technological systems that had been relied upon for decades suddenly encountered an extremely unconventional threat. The focus is now on the widespread use of low-cost unmanned systems operating through fiber-optic control. This development is now being discussed by military analysts across the world, because this is no longer viewed as a localized issue, but rather as a broader transformation in the logic of modern ground operations. Against this backdrop, more experts are beginning to ask how effective heavy armored formations can remain in an environment where even small unmanned systems are capable of creating serious pressure on the entire structure of battlefield mobility. Dear viewers, you are on the channel Info Vector. With you is Daniel Brooks, and today we will take a detailed look at why the situation on the Lebanese front has become so complicated, how inexpensive technologies have started creating difficulties for highly advanced protection systems, and why, by 2026, many countries began studying this experience extremely carefully. The main feature of these new unmanned systems lies in the method of control. Unlike traditional drones that rely on radio communication, these platforms use an ultra-thin fiber-optic cable. This allows signals to be transmitted without using radio waves at all. As a result, standard electronic warfare systems are no longer functioning the way many designers originally expected. Previously, most military planners around the world operated under a relatively simple assumption. If communication between the operator and the drone could be disrupted, the threat would be neutralized. Many modern protection systems were built around precisely this concept. However, the new approach has fundamentally changed that equation. Now the drone continues moving even while powerful electronic suppression systems are fully active. Operators gain entirely new targeting capabilities, especially in difficult terrain such as mountains, dense urban areas, and narrow passageways. One of the most significant concerns now is the speed at which these systems are scaling. According to multiple analysts, the operational range of such drones has already reached approximately 10 kilometers and continues to expand. That is more than enough to create pressure on supply routes, vehicle convoys, and temporary positions long before forces even approach frontline areas. For Israel, this has become a major technological challenge. Enormous resources had previously been invested into missile defense systems, intelligence capabilities, and cybersecurity infrastructure. However, the large-scale use of inexpensive unmanned systems emerged as a completely different category of threat. Particular attention is now focused on the Trophy Active Protection System, which for years was considered one of the most advanced systems in the world. It demonstrated extremely high effectiveness against conventional anti-tank threats, yet the new reality revealed additional complications when dealing with slower maneuvering aerial targets. The issue is largely connected to system algorithms. The platform was designed to intercept fast objects with relatively predictable trajectories. Small drones moving irregularly at low speed can sometimes be interpreted as insignificant interference. To avoid constant false activations, developers previously introduced speed filters, and this feature has now become one of the most actively discussed vulnerabilities. Additional difficulties are created by the upper hemisphere of armored vehicles. Many drones attempt to approach from above, targeting the most sensitive sections. As a result, even relatively small impacts in the right location can temporarily remove vehicles from operational use. On several sections of the line of contact, there have already been cases where armored vehicles remained out of operation for extended periods following such incidents. Analysts also emphasize the economic asymmetry of the situation. Highly expensive systems are now facing pressure from extremely low-cost solutions. But an even more serious factor, according to specialists, is the psychological impact. For armored crews and infantry units, the atmosphere of constant observation is gradually becoming a separate problem of its own. Drones remain present in the air almost continuously, reducing the overall sense of control over the situation. Israeli military doctrine for decades was built around the idea of rapid maneuver and technological superiority. Heavy armored units were expected to rapidly reshape the battlefield and support deep operational movement. However, by 2026, it became increasingly clear that new technologies were significantly slowing these types of operations. One of the most visible changes involves logistics. Modern armored vehicles represent only a small part of a much larger infrastructure. Behind them are supply trucks, mobile repair teams, fuel transport vehicles, and evacuation platforms. These elements are now becoming among the most vulnerable parts of the system. Even after relatively successful movement forward, units can face major difficulties within only a few hours. Any attempt to organize fuel delivery, personnel rotation, or equipment transportation now requires far greater caution. At the same time, the airspace has become heavily saturated with reconnaissance drones. This dramatically reduces the element of surprise. Any large concentration of equipment is now identified much faster than before. As a result, units are increasingly forced to focus not on rapid movement, but on camouflage, dispersion, and identifying safer routes. The pace of operations gradually decreases, while the overall character of the line of contact continues to evolve. Previously, such challenges were usually addressed through anti-tank teams or fortified defensive positions. Now the environment is changing. Guided unmanned systems can influence armored vehicles remotely, while operators themselves often remain deep inside protected locations. Another major challenge involves evacuating wounded personnel and damaged equipment. Any visible movement of transport vehicles quickly attracts the attention of reconnaissance drones. As a result, some areas are turning into so-called gray zones where movement becomes extremely limited. Israeli military analysts are now increasingly discussing the need to reconsider the overall concept of ground warfare itself. It became clear that even strong air superiority does not guarantee full control at lower altitudes. Drones are effectively creating an entirely separate layer of influence over the battlefield. Against this backdrop, an operation that was initially expected to move relatively quickly gradually shifted into a much more prolonged and exhausting form of confrontation. Every settlement and every elevation now requires significantly more time and resources. But perhaps the most difficult factor increasingly discussed by specialists is the psychological condition of personnel. The constant presence of drones creates a feeling of uninterrupted surveillance. Many soldiers begin to perceive even short movement between positions as a serious risk. If armored protection and defensive structures were once viewed as relatively reliable safety measures, the situation is now changing. Small drones are capable of entering buildings through windows, openings, and narrow passages. This significantly affects the overall atmosphere inside frontline units. Military experts are already discussing the emergence of a new psychological phenomenon, a constant state of stress, created by the feeling of continuous observation from unmanned systems. As a result, decision-making slows down, caution increases, and initiative on some sectors begins to decline. For elite units, one of the most difficult adjustments has been realizing that high levels of training no longer guarantee the same advantages they once did. Even highly experienced personnel now face situations where inexpensive technologies can create major influence regardless of individual skill. Against this backdrop, Israeli leadership has been forced to accelerate the search for new solutions directly during active operations. The country's defense industry is now functioning in a mode of extremely rapid adaptation. One of the most discussed developments is the iron beam laser system. Such technologies are expected to significantly reduce the cost of intercepting drones. However, many questions still remain regarding mobility, weather conditions, and the ability to deploy such systems on a large scale. At the same time, units are increasingly relying on their own unmanned systems to counter similar threats. In many ways, the battlefield is gradually transforming into an environment dominated by operators and drone warfare. Additional temporary solutions are also being implemented. Extra metal protection structures on armored vehicles, new camouflage methods, greater equipment dispersion, and constant route changes. However, the main conclusion many analysts are now reaching extends far beyond Israel or Lebanon specifically. the discussion is increasingly about a global transformation in the overall logic of modern warfare. Heavy armored vehicles remain an important military component, but their role is gradually evolving. Speed of adaptation, mass production of low-cost technologies, artificial intelligence, and autonomous systems are becoming increasingly important. Fiber-optic drones are already being described as one of the most unexpected technological developments of recent years. They demonstrated how quickly the balance between expensive and inexpensive systems can shift. Many specialists believe that the events unfolding in southern Lebanon during 2026 will be studied in military academies across the world for years to come. Modern conflicts are increasingly evolving faster than military doctrines themselves. What is becoming increasingly clear today is that the future may depend less on the price of equipment and more on how quickly military structures can adapt to emerging threats and implement unconventional solutions. This was Daniel Brooks. See you in the next Analytical Reviews.